Hello, everybody from virtual Bologna. I am Elena Pasoli, director of the Bologna Children's Book Fair. A big thank you to all of you for joining us today. Thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you very much to Ivanka Hannenberger and Cristina Angelucci, who put together, who created this fabulous panel. The relationship between the page and the screen has been explored by the Bologna Children's Book Fair since the 90s, let me tell this. And we have had inside the fair a digital area now for more than 20 years, and we've had the digital award for so many years, and we have developed the new digital award this year, changing it, switching to cross-media award. And this award exactly looks at all the conversion, all the passages, all the switching from page to screen and opposite. So this is a panel that it was very much expected by ourselves as first. And so it's a very interesting and a great pleasure for me to listen to this panel with all of you from your desk. So thank you very much. I give the floor to Cristina, and I hope to see you all in Bologna next year from 21st to 24th in March. Goodbye.
Thanks, Elena, for the introduction and the greetings, and thanks everybody for attending this seminar. For me, it was a high-awaited event during the Bologna Book Fair digital edition, and all of us, we wish to be back in person next year. As we know, I have to say that this digital edition is really working great. We are having really a wonderful content and really a lot of content to share along these days, and it's really a packed program. In this program, for us, this was one of the most awaited conferences. And why? Because the link and the relationship between publishing an audiovisual project is a long-standing relationship. And I would say that since ever, it's like this. And we know that Bologna is the cradle of children's content, is the place where TV producers go to find new titles, new IPs, to develop them into audiovisual projects. They can be feature films, they can be TV series. And many times TV producers then need of publishers to create good looking books and content books that give long life to TV series as well. So based on this, in this seminar, we want to analyze and go in depth on the rights process that starts from publishing and arrives to producers, in this case, having a talk with some of the main key players of the industry that we are really pleased to welcome here. And they are very short, and then we will interview each one of them. Caterina Gonnelli, Executive Vice President, Content, Xylam Animation from France. Hi, Caterina. Annie Naibo, from US reader for Netflix and much more. Etienne Bonnen, Head of Foreign Rights at Glénat in France. Salut, Etienne. Ellen Doherty, Chief Creative Officer, Fred Rogers Production, always from USA. Hi, Helen. Lovely to see you again. So, I will work like this in this seminar. I will start to interview first, as I said, we will analyze the chain of the rights process. So I will start with the publisher, then I will talk with the reader, and then finally with the producers. Of course, along this conversation, you are free to use the Q&A chat to make your questions to our guest as long as we proceed with this talk. So I will start with Etienne. Etienne Bon from Glénat. Of course, he's in the publishing industry since over 15 years, and he has always dealt with rights. And actually, you are, in fact, the director of rights and licensing at Glénat in France, and we know that is one of the biggest French publisher, also in particular on comics. And we know that comics have really a lot to do with animation and TV production. So the first question, I will start. Does the publisher seek a producers, or it happens after to you that producers go to publishers?
Sure. Hello, Christina. Hi, everyone else. Thank you for welcoming me to this panel. Well, I'd say that it really goes both ways. Of course, we have producers coming to us because they've read this or that book and they find a potential in it, or they've heard about a book that they haven't read yet and they would like to read it. So they reach out to us to get a sample or a PDF to read and assess the book because they want to read it and find if a potential adaptation is possible. But on the other hand, we as a publisher, we are trying to get in touch with producers we know already, but also producers we don't know yet, for them to get a better understanding of what we do, for them to read books that maybe they haven't yet heard of, or I mean, there are thousands of books being published every year. So of course, there are the ones that the press talks about. There are the bestsellers. There are the one that this or that publisher may have read for personal reasons. But there's all those other books that are great stories, but that publishers, producers have not seen. And our job is to make them see those books and read those books.
I understand. And in the US industry, readers are in the between the producers and publishers. How does it work in France?
What do you mean?
I mean, you have a straight relationship with the producer. At the stage, there is the process to develop into animation or TV series. Yes. I mean, you don't have the reader who make that job and go to the producer to.
No, in a nutshell, in France, the producer, the publisher is also the author's agent.
Okay.
So we are the one reaching out to producers for them to discover new books.
Okay, that is. And you say that there are producers that you already know and others that you don't know. So you have usually a group of producers you are used to work with. Are they mainly French, or do you work also with the foreign producers?
Well, they are, as a matter of fact, they are mainly French for many reasons. The first one being that our books are first and foremost published in French. Some of them are translated. Unfortunately, not all of them are translated, and maybe not in a short period of time. So it's easier for a French producer to read, or for someone reading French to be able to read our books. The other reason is that France has a large number of producers and has a production environment that is subsidized, with a lot of producers, with a lot of government agencies helping producers moving on. And of course, we benefit from that, and we are part of this environment. So mostly French, but not only. We've had option deals with the US, with China, with Northern Europe countries, with the UK, with Spain, with Italy. So mostly French, but not only. And we are always, happy to talk to anyone and everyone.
Yeah, and how many titles have been developed from Glénat by now into on the small screen or feature films, if you can say?
Well, if it depends if we've talked about books that have been developed or developments that have been produced. There are a lot of developments, unfortunately, for all of us publishers and producers. Not all the eggs make chicks.
Yeah, I know. Let's see the finalized ones.
So we've had dozens of films and TV series that have been broadcasted and developed and produced over the past 5, 10, 15 years. And at the moment, we've got 20 more being developed, and for which we hope that they're going to be produced at some point.
Yeah. Another question for you: how do you scout books for your portfolio? How do you scout books?
Well, so Glénat publishes about 700 books every year, which is a lot. Out of those books, our job is to sort of assess which ones have a potential. For example, Glénat is mostly famous for comics and graphic novels, but Glénat also publishes hiking books, maps. So those have a smaller potential or no potential. So out of the 700 books, at the end of the day, there are just a few that can be of potential. And then we go to fairs. We reach out to our partners. We have newsletters in order to make those books available and known.
I understand. A very last question for you that has been suggested by my partner in crime for this event at this Ivanka. Is the pitch different from a pitch for foreign publishing rights? I mean, a pitch regarding TV development, how is different from a pitch for foreign publishing rights?
It is different because we're not selling the same thing. We're selling the potential of a series, or we're selling the potential of a feature film, and not a book as such. It has to be more centered and focused on the story and the characters and the location where it is, what happens, and how the characters evolve throughout the story. While a pitch to sell a book can also rely on the design of the characters, of the length of the book, because depending on the number of pages, you don't have the same kind of partners, publishers, target readers. And of course, all this, the length of the book, the design, can be changed and will be adapted when going to stream. A little bit less if it's animation, but when you're going from a comic book to a live feature, but then the drawing has not the same kind of importance as when you're selling the foreign rights.
That is, and also we can say that it's also a matter of long-term relationship, no? With the producers, it's always a kind of wedding, because a TV producer then keeps the rights for at least 30 years. Yes. It's the minimum quantity of rights, and for foreign rights in terms of publishing, it's slightly different, the timing. Okay, I have a question for you from the Q&A that I do immediately, so then we move forward. It's from Mariam Zager, I hope to have it well pronounced. How do you argue the case of producing a film around an original story instead of a franchise or fairy tale that has already been around more many years or even decades?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. So, but from what I understand,
I think that according to her, which is the difference of going ahead with the production of a story that is an original story, so something new, also from something is more a franchise. So we know that around a franchise there is even
right. So having a third, a fourth, or
yeah.
Well, I think the world needs both. Franchise are less of a risk, I guess, for a producer, but that producers can answer this question. I think franchise are less of a risk, but after a while they sort of run out. So you need, fresh meat to for the readers. It's the same with books. I mean, we publish new books, new stories, because all of us reading books, watching series, watching movies, we all want the comfort of going somewhere we already know, but we also want to discover new things. And I think we need both, really.
Yeah, I totally do agree with you, because from one side, the franchises give something kind of strength to whatever you do, but not always is the right time also to push some franchise respect to another. Exactly. On the other side, we always need of new content, because from a producer to a publisher and all the industries for any kind, even for the consumer products categories, they also need to find something new and fresh on the market. Thanks so much again. So now I will ask, then we will chat again at the end if we can make some questions all together at the end. So I invite on the stage Annie Naibo, story analyst and book editor, work in California. Great. And before going to Hollywood, she also worked as a children's book editor at the Simon & Schuster and Albert Whitman and Company. So welcome, Annie.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
It's a big pleasure to host you. So here again, I have some questions ready for you. I start. So what does a reader look for in a book, in a work, and how do they summarize it for the producer? How do they?
That's a great question.
It's a big question. It is the secret of your job, I would say.
It is. I'm going to start with the second part of that first, which is, so any books or scripts coming to my company are then sent to people, and I'm one of them. And so I read a book and I write a 3-page summary of the synopsis. And then I write a 1-page of analysis. And we rate all projects on 5 criteria, which are premise, structure, which is like, is it hitting the plot beats? Storyline, which is how that plot is working, character, and dialogue. And even if it's a book, I'm still able to rate dialogue based on, how the characters speak, and do they sound unique to a character versus like, does everyone kind of sound the same way? And so that is kind of like the rating system that goes into a report that I write. And it's basically a reader's report. But what I look for in a project is I'll start with the premise, because, I have to summarize, we all have to write like log lines and like summarize a whole project in 1 sentence. And so for me, finding a project where the premise is the conflict of the book is really important, because if you take something like To All the Boys I Loved Before, where the premise is that a girl has written a lot of love letters that have been sent out and now she has to deal with it. Like the conflict is also now she has to deal with it, as opposed to things where the premise is like, there's this whole society and then you learn it's a lie. And so for me, it's often easier to go for projects that are like really concise. I also look for that blend of familiar and fresh. I want to find something where that's a great example of its genre and where the author clearly knows what genre they're working in and hits those structural points, but has these interesting twists and turns that surprise me. So like, I want to know what's going to happen at the end, but I also want to be surprised how it gets there. It's kind of those things I'm looking for.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot. And what should a rights salesperson look for in titles that could suit to producers?
I've thought about this a lot because, you know, the easiest thing is to say, like, I really want mermaids right now. But like, instead, I think, because I'm the person analyzing, I want something that is like the best example of any genre you have. So if it's like, I want the best rom-com that is like feeling like a rom-com. And for me, it doesn't matter like how many copies it's sold. And actually speaking to that franchise question and like how many fans you have, a thing I'll take into consideration when thinking about adaptations is like, if there is a plot point that I don't think will work very well for screen, how invested fans are going to be in it. You know, there's more room to shift things when you don't have an enormous audience. And so like I can end up making comments like that. I also really look for I'm like diverse voices and viewpoints. And we're at an international rights fair, so I obviously have to take into consideration like an American audience, but I try my hardest to find ways in to like what's the universal part of this story to get as much breadth as possible. It's mostly you know, solid examples of story and like things working on all cylinders for me are more important than like really excellent literary writing, because that can't translate to screen as well as like snappy characters can.
Yeah, I see. And also because as I see working for Netflix, you need to have a global, a worldwide overview on what you read, because then I see that also Netflix is also doing a lot of local production based on the local audience, but then pushing that property globally. So if we see the example of La Casa de Papel, from Spain as one of the most important, so it's not book-based, but just to make an example on how Netflix is working in terms of production, starting from Spain, but then it exploded globally, worldwide. So I think that you need to have that kind of overview. It has happened to you to read more US or European or other stories coming from abroad, from US?
I read mostly US. I end up with a lot of books from the UK, but I think that I'm not quite sure how they get to me. I kind of get what the producers send me. But okay. It's mostly US works.
Okay. And then which is the percentage of titles that then you recommend at the end to producers?
Sorry?
What is the percentage of titles that then you recommend?
So I calculated, last year I read 215 scripts and books, and I recommended 8 of them. And so that's about a 4% acceptance rate of projects. But for books specifically, I read 22 books and recommended 4. So that's 14%. And that's also half of what I recommended. So, you know, with a book, for me, there's a little trepidation sometimes because I don't know how it will be adapted and things change, you know, if there's not a screenwriter attached. But you also have a really strong sense of the plot and what's working. So I find it was 50% of what I recommended this year. So.
Wow, I think it's very tough to make this selection, isn't it? So
it's a lot of pressure.
It's a bit of pressure. Yes, it is. It is. I asked to the audience if they do have any question for Annie before I move with the producers team. Here I have in the Q&A something from Sylvia, but it's for Etienne. The first steps. So Etienne, if you can check the Q&A very quickly, so then I move to producers, and then we can go back with these questions for you after I have completed the round. Okay.
Oh, I've seen the question.
Okay.
Well, it's in different steps. We present books to producers. To be honest, we don't present usually a book to a producer. We sort of have meetings and calls, and we discuss about many books. And out of those, the producer may want to read 1, 2, 3, whatever. And from there, the producer, should he want to move on with developing a TV series or a feature film, would acquire an option. An option is a limited period of time during which the producer can work on a script or a treatment, for instance. And at the end of this option period, if the producer is, 1, happy with what he's done, and 2, confident that it can be turned into a show because he found financiers, because he's got a green light from a broadcaster, for instance, only then the option is what we call exercised, and then the movie is produced, and even then it should be produced, and it usually is produced after a while, but as long as it's not here, we never know, because it's a long path for a producer as well.
Yeah,
but when it's produced, then it goes for 30 years, more or less, and they could be exclusivity periods. It could be a little longer, a little shorter, but in a nutshell, that's it. I mean.
Yeah, and now we will have also Caterina and Ellen that will explain us the US and the European model, but we can say that the option, then the producer goes to the market looking for the partners. Yeah. He finds the partners. He goes back to the owner of the rights, in this case, Glénat. They do finalize the acquisition of the rights, paying, because then the financial plan is closed, so they can get the risk to go into production, because all the money are in the house. And then you consider 18 months at least to have the production released. So
I'm sure Caterina will be even more precise than I've been about these questions.
That's why I was calling on the stage Caterina and Ellen to go in depth on this matter. Then another issue that I think is very interesting to talk further, if we have time, is that some publishers have the rights of the book. Others don't, because the rights are owned by the author, are owned by the agent of an author. So just to make an example, Roald Dahl has its own foundation, the Roald Dahl Foundation, that owns all the rights. So if a producer wants to make anything with Roald Dahl, has to go to the foundation and not to the publisher. And this happens usually for, we can say, the biggest author on the market, but consider that, of course, in this case, at the place of the publisher, the producer will speak with the agent of the author. So Caterina and Ellen, I'm very pleased to welcome you on the stage. Caterina Gonelli, she joined Exilam in January 2020, right before pandemic, and actually she oversees all the content of this wonderful animation studio, big animation studio based in France, but known all over the world, with a lot of productions from Oggy and Chips and Dale and many others. But before, she was director acquisitions and co-production at the Walt Disney Company. It's where we met first. And then Ellen, I welcome you to be on the stage together with us. Ellen Doherty, Chief Creative Officer at the Fred Roger Productions. She oversees the creation of television digital content for this wonderful company. Among the others, Daniel Tigers, Neighborhood, and Don Quixote, Peg and Cat, Odd Squad, and others. And I see a lot of awards also, and lovely to see you again. So if we can have the screen together with Caterina and Ellen, Andrea, it would be great. That is, I want this. Great. So actually, by the way, we totally envy Caterina because she's attending MIFA, the Festival of Annecy in France. So it's the first time there is an in-person event happening that is hybrid, as she was explaining before starting the session. But just to know that we love you, but envy you a bit today. And so we started with the conversation. So I move forward with the questions for you. Of course, with you, I feel somehow more confident.
Thank you for welcoming me here. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And hi, everyone.
Big pleasure, Caterina, big pleasure. And so for both, I will start before Caterina and then Ellen. What are the things to look out for in the books, especially we're talking about children's books, that make them not at all appealing, but instead really appealing, that then you want absolutely to buy the rights. So first Caterina and then Ellen.
So both cases, huh? The positive and the negative.
What you really don't like, what you really like.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say that what I look for, and here I think that I will echo what Annie just said, I would look for who's the character, I mean, and what is the authenticity of the character. That is absolutely key. So we want authentic characters and characters who are really moved by a strong drive and a clear drive as well. Of course, for children's content, we would want this character also to embody positive character traits, which does not mean that he or she is flawless. Of course, we also want flaws, because otherwise there is no salt in the recipe. But the flaws, I mean, the flaws are what comedy builds on. So absolutely, we want flaws, but these flaws should be relevant for kids of the age that we have in mind. We would love to see also the underlying themes in a clear way. And again, in an authentic and not preachy way. And we would like to see very clearly what is the character's trajectory in the book or in the comic book or in the graphic novel. Yes, so I would say that on the contrary, what doesn't work for us is what is static in all the senses, in all the meanings of this world. either static because there isn't action, or static because there aren't turning point and surprising points for the characters. We want characters to bring change in them, in their perception of the world, and also in their surrounding, in the world they live in. This is an ideal character. And on the contrary, characters who are just, for example, deeply into a auto-analysis generally don't work really for us, or streams of consciousness would not. I mean, I'm talking, of course, in broad strokes, but I don't think that that would be an easy content to be adapted on screen. Long monologues, you know, just one person talking and talking, that wouldn't work. And then this is another consideration. This is a consideration that is really much more concrete. When we're doing TV series, we would also have some parameters that are really some production parameters, of course. So we would be conscious of, you know, the number of places the action takes place in. We would be mindful, of course, for production reasons, on the overall number of sets, characters involved, words involved, etc. But I really think that everything that Annie said stands good for me. So yes, in terms of you know, is the story representative of its genre? Are the turning points clear? Are the story points clear? And is there an element of surprise?
Yeah. Ellen, which is your perspective from US?
Well, I'm going to echo everything that Katerina said, and also Annie, because they both made really excellent points about the key things that we're all looking for, I think. And it does go off on the last thing that Katerina said, which is the surprise part. I think that, you know, in reading something, there's also sort of that initial reaction of, if you smile, if it makes you think, if you learn something, if it just changes a perspective a little bit, like that's the secret ingredient that we're all looking for. And I think also, you know, from the diverse viewpoints, it's looking for, right now, you know, a real priority is looking at books and writers or illustrators who are telling stories that are experiences that are not often seen, or viewpoints that are not seen enough in children's media, be it in books or in TV or film. I think that the things that don't work are the things that just, for a lot of reasons, that don't pop, you don't get to know enough of the character or the world, you know, as Katerina said, that it's static. You know, sometimes there's just no growth. And whether that's, you know, the character starts the same, is the same at the end as at the beginning. And there's not a lot to hang on to there for either comedy or for drama or for learning. So I think those things are important too. And one of the just sort of other points that I think about too is that with picture books, because often if it's not an author illustrator, if you like the story, you know, if I like the story, but I'm not so keen on the artwork, that's okay, because we can, you know, we're going to probably work with the author, and then we would create, you know, a new look for the show, which could be, you know, potentially live action or also animation, but you know, you're not tied necessarily to the look of the pictures. So that can take something that, you know, you may not be as interested in the pictures, but you love the story. So there's still a path forward there.
Also, in the case of picture books, of course, the style of the images, I mean, the look, the style makes its impact, I suppose. In terms of scouting of titles. So Ellen's from US, based in Pittsburgh. That's a wonderful city. And Caterina, you're based in France. And we know that France is the first industry in animation, but also in general, in audiovisual production in Europe, thanks also to all the funds that there are in France and so on. In terms of scouting, for you, Caterina, for you, Ellen, are you looking for more local-based content or more global? We know that many times it makes difference. So in your case, Caterina?
So one thing that you have to keep in mind is that the animation industry and specifically the animation for TV and platforms, is a global industry, much more than live action. It hasn't, I mean, historically, it hasn't relied on the local touch as much as live action, who is embodied by real actors. And also in terms of costs, is a very costly way of producing content compared again to live action, and a long one which needs amortization with international sales very clearly. So when we scout for content coming from books, we would definitely look at what is the international potential of the book. Either we would, but again, I mean, there is no dogma. So we could go for a book which is already an international success. And in that case, we would assume that the route is already paved for international success. And in that case, we know that we would reply to the rationale, why am I paying the adaptation rights? By the answer, well, because some of the work has already been done. I mean, because the route is already paved. But then we could also take a different approach. And so this is why I'm saying there is no dogma, because we do things, I mean, we love our job and we do things because our heart brings to this or that beloved book or beloved novel, graphic novel, comic book. And sometimes in very local and very author-oriented, independent works, we find the authenticity and the really, I can say the force of the soul, if I can say, if I can use these strong words, that really tells us that, yeah, there is a key ingredient also to travel internationally. So even if the story is very local, but it taps into things that are universal because it is essential, because it is well seen, because it is, when I say well seen, I mean it's true, it's done with depth, it's done with authenticity. So I think that those works can travel. And I do not like the adjective local, because it's a mashup of adjectives, but I think that you can have very local examples, but that have an international aura and that can be understood internationally.
Yeah, so the famous magic formula that nobody has. And in your case, Ellen, do you look forward more US titles, or also you give some look on European and other countries' titles to develop into your production?
Definitely, I look openly to just where are good stories and good characters. We work with a book scout named Rachel Hecht, who's awesome. And she's always, you know, I think probably we prioritize looking at things that are published in English, but she's really always looking at the global market as well. I also follow a lot of artists and illustrators, authors and illustrators on social media, and I'm completely agnostic as long as I can read the tweets or get it Google Translate, like it's you know, it doesn't matter what the source country is per se. It's more about the characters, the story, what's appealing, and what sparks. really. One of our, but in terms of that sort of hyper-local can have broad appeal category that Katerina was describing, we have a new series that's launching on PBS Kids this fall called Alma's Way, which is created by author and actor Sonia Manzano. And it's about a Puerto Rican girl from New York City, from the Bronx. So not just New York City, but very specifically from the Bronx. And I think that the show will be able to travel well because although it is very much a story about the Bronx, it's also like Alma is a very relatable kid, and the things that she faces, the questions that she has, the situations are just relatable to kids, you know, who are in that same age range, wherever they are, I think. The themes resonate.
Great. And then in terms of the chain business process, which are the difference between US and Europe, if we can say that? So Ellen first in this case.
You know, I don't actually know how the deals are structured in Europe, so I'm not sure if I can
now
answer.
We will discover by Katerina right after.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Etienne described about the option period, and then if you exercise the option, and then there's the longer rights period is, you know, generally our approach, I would say.
Yeah, but in your case, US, when you find a project, do you need also, as it happens usually in Europe, to look for co-producers, or you don't?
Depends. We generally do work with co-producers just because we're a smaller company and that's sort of our point of view. But we look for, it depends. We decide the format of the story. You know, is it animation, live action, puppets? What is that point of view? And then I look for people that I want to work with on that.
Yeah, because usually, I mean, then Katerina will explain better, a company based in Europe, usually they combine the potential of the production with other co-producers who at their stage find the TV broadcasters interested in their respective countries. So in this way, they group together, they make the mix. So looking for the co-producer, but each co-producer at this stage is linked somehow to the specific broadcaster of his territory. Is it, Katerina, more or less like this?
Yes, so just to go back to the initial question, I think that, I mean, the big, how can I say, chain of rights system is the same, I would say. I mean, I don't see a lot of differences between Europe and the US. I would say that perhaps in the US and in the UK, as you also said, there are more, I mean, the role of agents and of literary agents is traditionally, but this is also changing, more developed than in Europe, if I dare say. So that is the difference. But then I wouldn't see big difference in terms of how you do business. I would rather see then technical differences that go back to legal differences between our two systems. But I'm certainly not the good person to talk really about the legal technicalities. Now, in terms of co-productions, co-productions are not an absolute must. There can be instances where, for example, Xilam would not have co-producers, and other instances where Xilam would have co-producers, would typically have, say, European co-producers or pre-buyers. And if there are real co-producers, as you say, yes, each brings the key broadcasters and to the financing pot of the series. That is, yes, the principle.
Yeah, because in this case, it guarantees the launch on the different countries where the co-producers come from. Very, very brief answer to a short question. How are you loyal to the book-based IP when you make the development? It's very tough, I know. Katerina?
So yes, we could debate for hours. So you can really take the two voices are true, both. So on the one hand, you can really say that the original author, the initial author, is the best place in the world to know his or her characters. And on the other end, or the other hand, you can say that you need distance to understand in depth the characters, the situations, the world that he or she has initially imagined. So I guess that what is really key is the relationship, to build a relationship that is based on trust, mutual trust. And for that, you need to factor in a lot of time, of course, meaning that you need, as a producer, you certainly need to build in your schedule lots of moments that you that allow you to talk with the author. I think that if you try to skip the moment of putting your author in the loop initially and reassuring the author about the fact that you're taking good care of the initial book, then you're in for trouble and you're in for a lot of anxiety from both sides, I think. So I think, yeah, mutual trust is very important. I think I have to do a parenthesis here. I don't know how we're doing with time, but
more or less so and so.
So, okay, yeah, well, of course, there are also books where you have a design part and a literary part, and then perhaps you have two different authors, or you decided to take the rights only on one of the two.
Yeah, and also
it can increase complexity.
Of course, it's complexity on complexity, and many times the author and the illustrator, they feel that this that kind of child that then somehow has been changed by the producer. So I think that the confidence, the trust between producer and the author and the illustrator is really compassionate to start any kind of development. Which is your opinion, Ellen?
I think that relationship with the author, between the producer and the author, is key, and hopefully that can be that trust can be built, and the understanding of the TV or film version can be built together during the development phase, so that when you get to production, you've already had you've had the meeting of the minds, and you know with one vision what's going to happen. But ultimately, when it comes to a TV version, for me, the producer has to have the final say, because we know our medium the best. And I have seen instances where an author has too much control and the translation to the new medium doesn't work so well. Exactly.
I do totally agree with you. And that is the matter of the trust, the mutual trust and the confidence is that when you build this, you can guide the author to the best TV result. Many times that doesn't correspond to what the author or the illustrator or the author is also illustrator has in mind. That is the biggest challenge somehow. I have a question for you from the audience, and Mariam asks, as a producer, if a project comes to you also with an extended merchandise plan, are you interested to be involved in all the strategy, or you are really focused on production? I suppose I know the answer from Xilam. I don't know what about Fred Rogers' production, but I think the answer is pretty evident.
Yes.
Yes.
we control all of the IP, really, and it's because it's one world.
It's one world.
It's not separate things. It's one world of the characters and the stories. That's what children experience. So it needs to be one vision.
Yeah, and in this case, we should open another session talking about how much the children's content nowadays is totally integrated. So a producer can't avoid from merchandise, can't avoid from digital content, can't avoid from to be involved in all the process, as nowadays it's not all about TV production, but we are talking to develop a children's content IP. Correct, Caterina?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I will do have another question. Okay, it's the same, sorry. So then a very final question for you. So then I call then the others also on board for the final question. How comics, so we can be all together if we can, how comics, according to you, are getting more and more attention from the publishing, reader, and producer perspective. So again, of course, I mean, Glénat is one of the main publishers in comics, but according to you, Etienne, in the last period, have you found that there is more attention from producers on comics or not, or the same?
No, I think there has been a lot more attention from producers on comics. Maybe not that much from animation producers who've always been looking at comics because, I mean, the bridge is obvious. But I think the main difference over the past 5 to 10 years is the fact that producers, and maybe beyond that, broadcasters who finance or viewers have seen comics as potential good stories, not only targeted as to geeks who love comics. And I think some landmark movies have marked that. Of course, the Marjan Satrapi animation story, Persepolis, 10 or 12 years ago now. It was animation, but it sort of reached a wider audience and showed that a comic could also be an interesting story. I mean, it's weird to say that now, but I think we were there at that time. And later on, Blue is the Warmest Color, which won the Palme d'Or in Cannes as a feature film. This showed that a book which was a great story, yes, as a comic, but a great story with wonderful heart and characters in it, could make a film, but which was also an indie movie with a director's vision. And this, I think, opened these two and others as well, opened doors to having producers look at comics even more. And of course, the streaming platforms that have been here for a few years now are in need of content. And I guess producers, and Katerina and Ellen can approve or not. Producers are looking for IPs wherever they are. And comics and graphic novels, I know, they are, before being, books with pictures, they're stories. And that's what matters.
That is totally correct. Annie, which is your perception? Are you reading more comics or books nowadays for producers?
I read more books, but I do read comics, and I will say that it's not just a story, but it is also a script. Like, there are some benefits to a comic because basically how it will read without the extra description. So I think about it the same way I think about books and scripts, and I do see all kinds of things.
Yeah, so very shortly, Elle and Caterina, so then I have a couple of questions from the Q&A side. Ellen and Caterina, more comics in the last period, are more interesting for you, or it's...
I mean, I think that the other thing is just the profusion of opportunities to be able to find that content, not just the published comics and graphic novels, but also, again, on social media, on Instagram, to be able to follow individual creators that way is really interesting, because you get to see more of their personality, you get to see maybe their playfulness and things that are in process. And I really like that. And there's, there are people that I'm watching to see what they do next, and who I'm checking out their books as they go and have talked to and stuff like that. But finding them through social, like Instagram.
Yeah, I guess I have nothing really to add. And I think that comic books lately demonstrated that they're not niche. This is what we are all saying also, that there are so many genres.
And in fact, in Bologna too, there is a comic section that is coming bigger and bigger and bigger. Etienne, you wanted to add a word, or just have Okay, just okay.
So I pushed the wrong button.
Okay, so I have a question from for Annie. So I go straight to the Q&A quickly as time runs. We have to be very fast. And for Annie, a question for you. For movies, what in California you feel should be proposed as a stories for the next decade? Teens, fantasy, dystopian stories, children's stories, something like this. What do you think it looks like to be more trendy?
So I'll start just with the disclaimer that this is just kind of like personal anecdote of what I'm seeing, but I'm seeing a lot of like this question asked about like fantasies. I'm seeing, Netflix just did Shadow and Bone. You've got HBO Max is doing a Harry Potter TV series. Amazon is doing Lord of the Rings. Like for movies, I'm seeing much more contemporary, whether it's thrillers, like rom-coms, a lot of like that mystery action movies. Like I find that like the bigger projects have ended up going the ways of like Game of Thrones. And right now I'm seeing movies be much more contained, but that's just my kind of what I've been reading lately, basically.
Yeah, and of course, what we look for is your point of view. So here I have from Q&A a last question for Ellen and Caterina. They do ask, do you actively search for book projects to develop into series, or are they pitched to you? And if you are actively scouting, where do you find projects? Ellen?
Both. Actively seek and get pitched. And I find projects and books through by meeting people, through our book scout, Rachel Hecht, by reading the trades, and by following people on social to see what pops and what's new.
Yeah. And do you have a certain period that you look for content, or is something that happens continuously? I mean,
ongoing.
Caterina?
Yes, exactly the same. I would only add that, yes, there are events in the year which are important, Bologna Book Fair being one, but also in France, the Montreuil Children's Book Fair. Those are peak times, but other than that, all the year round, I go to the bookshop and and I try to have my antenna working.
Yeah,
and then publishers do come to us and pitch. So
yeah, and always looking for novelties. Of course, Bologna is the place where to find the children's content, but yes, we know there are other places also, because sometimes you look for, I mean, in the producer perspective, contents can come from video games, can come from toys, can come from social content, and I mean, it's really a lot of input. So we are really in time. Perhaps if there are not other questions, we have been great. I'm very proud of you, as we have been in 1 hour time. That is the best time to make these conversations. And I really would love to thank you all again, Caterina, Annie, Etienne, and Ellen. You know that you are really welcome to come to visit us in Bologna next year. Is what we wish most, to welcome you back. And in the meantime, thanks so much for having been with us and shared with us your insights and your expertise. That is always so important to share and to keep talking with people as you. So thanks so much. And if there are not any other questions, I will say bye to everybody and to our beloved speakers. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.